Hey everybody, Travis Bowman here. I'm a fingerstyle guitar player and retro video game nerd. Finally joined at this table by my good friend Cody over here. Now, if you've been watching my channel for any length of time, then you've probably heard me mention his name at least once. You know, I got to thinking about all of the consoles and stuff that you've worked on for me. And it's a long list, dude. We're talking capacitor replacements on the N64, the Dreamcast at one point, the PS1, the Neo Geo,
the CD and the
yes,
8, yes,
and the Sega Saturn as well. Not to mention the RGB mods that you've done on the N64. You've done a bunch of stuff for me. I've been thinking about that before you came over here today. That's a lot of stuff, man.
Yeah.
So you are really like the saving grace of my YouTube channel, because I wouldn't be able to make videos on all that stuff without your expertise. So I'm extremely gracious that you were always around to kind of help me out when I definitely need it. So I figured we're going to do a video all about soldering for beginners. Now that could be probably on a multitude of different things, but our main focus is going to be on, you know, power supplies for a couple of retro consoles, namely the Dreamcast and the PlayStation 1. And we might get into some other stuff too while we're at the table here today. So how did you get into doing all this stuff? Because what you do is completely over my head and it blows my mind.
I really liked a lot of these old retro consoles growing up. I mean, this would have been about 2006 or 7, whenever I really started getting into retro consoles, whenever you could actually get them for nothing. And then after college, I kind of got back into those, and I was having to pay people to do some of this work. And then during 2020, 2021, when everybody was at home, I just kind of taught myself how to solder. There were definitely mistakes along the way, and we'll talk about some equipment that everybody will want to look at, different basic specifications for not necessarily expensive equipment, but stuff that will not ruin your stuff. This is a PS1. And this is one of the early ones. This is one of the 1001 revisions, and these are known for getting really hot. And they had laser issues. And this one doesn't have a laser in it at the moment because it's eventually going to have an X station in it. But you can see that the laser's here in the middle, and they ended up moving this. And it's very, very close to where the power supply is going to be at. And the power supply, if anybody had one of these growing up, they get pretty warm just leaving them in. And so there's going to be a lot of wear on a power supply. Generally over the motherboard, unless you have something like an Xbox 360 that just ran really, really hot. So this is where the power supply was, and we're just going to do some simple capacitor replacement on this. So just these capacitors, there's not that many. The work's not too difficult. We'll look at a desoldering gun, which is a little bit more expensive equipment, and then we'll look at just some copper braid. And so that's if you want to just do this pretty cheaply. And the Dreamcast, it's got a power supply in a similar position, so it's going to be over here on the left of the console. We're going to look at replacing the capacitors on that one. Those are a little bit more prone to leaking, so this is actually something that you really will want to do if you have a Dreamcast. But then we're also going to look at some other issues that sometimes people have with Dreamcast, like randomly shutting off and resetting, and that's mostly associated with these pins here. Whenever they get dirty, and the motherboard itself is not really making good contact with the power supply over time. So we'll look at an easy way to clean that. Then just some other little tips and tricks as we go along. This should be just something, if you've not really ever soldered before, this should be a pretty good video to kind of get you going.
Anytime that I try to do something informational on YouTube, I think of myself talking not to the camera or to you guys on YouTube, but to my younger self. Like, I'm trying to show you how to do this sort of thing. So something that I noticed on YouTube in particular that was really lacking was a video like this. You know, there's all sorts of videos of guys doing all these jobs, like, you know, like power supply recaps and stuff like that, but it's never as in-depth as I feel it should be for somebody that's a complete beginner. They just talk as though we've been doing this forever, you know, that sort of thing. So I think this is definitely a video that's going to be much needed in the community, especially for those of us who really enjoy these older consoles, because they are very much like us, getting older by the day.
Yeah.
The capacitors need to be changed out. The lasers are going to go bad. So having this kind of skill could be very useful to you, especially if you live somewhere where there's not a lot of people around that know how to do this stuff. You know what I mean?
There are services that you can send in your console, but you're going to pay quite a bit for that. And certain projects, like if we eventually get to a video on, which I don't think we can really see it here, these capacitors here are surface mount. You have to be much more careful just taking them out. There's some technique involved there.
They scare me.
Because those can actually, they could ruin your motherboard, or at least make it to where you would probably need someone with higher skill to replace some of the traces if you accidentally ripped some of those off. What we're doing today, simple through-hole capacitors, and I'll explain what that is whenever we get into it.
Got everything on the table that we need. This is a ton of equipment, by the way. I imagine the description of this video is going to be quite an extensive list of stuff. If you guys want to check all this stuff out for yourself, I'll put links in the description so you can check that out too. But I'm going to remove myself from the table, get another lens on my camera. We're going to zoom in and watch Cody the Master Solderer at work here. And hopefully by the end of the video, you'll learn something cool.
Soldering station that's not terribly expensive, but is going to be more expensive than probably like bottom of the barrel. You're looking at a little bit over $100, is the Hakko, the FX888D. And what really makes this thing special is that it can be set digitally to control the temperature. That's really important for the kind of work that we're doing. If you're using a soldering iron that does not have the ability to set the actual temperature, you're chancing that it's going to get too hot, and you're not going to know, and you're gonna burn up some pads, and you're gonna do some damage. I've definitely done that whenever I started out. And if you're a professional doing this, you're probably gonna have a better station than this. But if you're just gonna do this for hobbyist work, I think this FX888D is a really good one. And I've recommended this to multiple people, and they seem to be pretty happy with it too. We got a sponge here. We've got our brass that's going to kind of clean this thing up. That's pretty important to do as you're going along. These get dirty. You're not going to make a good connection if this is all dirty. This I don't really use as much. If we get to the surface mount capacitors, sometimes whenever you're getting rid of that last little bit of the pad that's on the surface mount capacitor, it'll kind of get stuck to the iron, and I'll kind of do that to get it off.
The cheap soldering iron that I purchased had that. None of that.
You can get these if you're okay buying from AliExpress. I mean, you're looking at like $1 and waiting a couple weeks for it to come in the mail. There's also some American suppliers, but this brass stuff, I mean, it's not very expensive. Desoldering equipment, if you want something that you don't have to spend that much money on, you're looking at some copper braid here, and it's just copper that has a little bit of flux in it. We'll show everybody how to use that. I think it's less than $10 for one of these packs. It should be quite a bit cheaper, but if you want to spend a little bit more money for desoldering equipment, the FR301 by Hakko is a really good desoldering gun. It'll actually get a little bit clogged up over time, so we can briefly talk about maintenance on this thing. But it takes these ceramic filters, and but it's really, really quick and efficient.
Much better than the little
Yeah.
solder sucker.
And yeah, the solder pump, I used to have one of those, but honestly these days I'm either using the FR301, this automated pump, which essentially is a soldering iron that has a pump attached to it, and it's sucking everything up into this. Or I'm using some braid. We've got some flush cutters, and these are going to be pretty useful for cutting off the ends of the leads of these capacitors. We have some tweezers. We have some flux. It's going to help our solder to flow to that joint that we're going to solder to. Kind of helps to clean a little bit of corrosion off. We will have to clean it up after that. A lot of these are sold these days as no clean, but really you still need to clean it because it can do some corrosion to the joint over time, and so you'd be having to open up your console again. You can use whatever you want, but that's why I brought Q-tips, because again, trying to do this on a budget, and it works.
I've seen solder that's liquid,
Uh-huh.
right? So what's the difference? Which one would you prefer to use and why?
I like this stuff because it's cheap, and the liquid though, if you're doing some surface mount stuff, really, really good. I just think it works a little bit better, doesn't make as much of a mess.
Okay.
And but for our through-hole soldering that we're doing with these power supplies, this is just fine. It's a good idea to have something that is going to remove the fumes that are created by this flux whenever it burns. The prices have gone up on these, but you can get something that I've seen, just fans with they have like a 3D printed piece on them with a charcoal filter. You can see it's got some battle damage too, but it just takes these charcoal filters in here, and it's got a fan. And I ended up just cutting some of these to size because I found some filters that were pretty cheap. And it will get quite dirty, and so it's taking out most of the fumes so that it doesn't hopefully end up in your lungs. Q-tips, I like using Q-tips. They're cheap. Most people have them around already. Some old toothbrushes, because again, you want to clean off this flux residue, and then also whenever you're soldering, it's possible that you're going to loosen up a little bit of solder that's not going to just stay attached to that joint, and so we don't want to accidentally have a short, like little pieces of flakes of solder are just touching stuff whenever this thing actually gets turned on. And so this just has 91% isopropyl alcohol in it, same kind of stuff that you can get at the store. And I like using that. You can get some higher grade stuff. It's going to cost considerably more. But like the 70%, I don't think that it does as good of a job. It takes a while to evaporate, and it tends to leave more of a residue. So whenever we get to the Dreamcast, I have gotten to the point where on some of this stuff I will buy capacitors from DigiKey or Mouser, and that's what I did here. So I kind of cobbled together something that would work. But if you're starting this out, Console 5, he's pretty reasonable on the pricing, and he's got the kit. And more importantly, I copied this from his little tech wiki, but it goes over for generally everything that he sells, whatever the power supply or motherboard or whatever that he has a kit for, it'll give you the values, which is what we're going to do. Is we're going to follow that, find the values here, and then replace those capacitors.
So big no-no if you put a capacitor in that is not the correct value, or if you put them in backwards, which I have done before.
Backwards can definitely be bad. A lot of them are rated for just so many hours to be installed backwards, so it would seem like it's working at first, but then it's going to fail. I had to be careful whenever I was just putting this little kit together because I didn't have time for another order for Console 5. You got to be careful of the size, too. I mean, the capacitors have different specifications, like some are they're going to last a lot longer than others, and they're going to have, without getting too complicated, you can pay more or less, but you're probably going to see it in the longevity of the capacitors. And since we're doing something like a power supply, they are a little bit more demanding on the kind of capacitors that you get. And the good thing about Console 5 is, like, the guy uses really good stuff. This is, I believe this is a Chemicon one. We've got Rubicon. A lot of the good Japanese branded capacitors. He's not giving you junk.
Yeah, you can get a complete capacitor kit for most consoles, and it's surprisingly cheap.
Plus, if you get this from this guy, he always gives you a fireball in the package too.
Candy,
So.
candy to go
Yeah.
with the caps. That's right. So when we're doing capacitor changes and stuff like that, we're working on these older consoles. What temperature should we be looking at? What should we be careful of? Is there a specific temperature that we should avoid going over? That sort of thing.
There can be variations between the equipment itself, but if you look online and you see what kind of solder that you're using, again, I messed up and didn't bring my my solder, so I'm having to use lead-free. But usually you want something like 60-40 with some lead and tin. That's good stuff. So, I mean, depending on, again, on the iron, but like 350 degrees Celsius is a good point if your iron itself is actually outputting that. And we can talk about calibration at some other point.
Okay.
But what the value that it says on the meter may not actually be what it's getting to at the tip of the soldering iron. This lead-free solder, it's going to have to be a higher temperature. It's a little harder to work with, and so. Again, this is actually my first time working with lead-free solder, so we'll see how that goes. I know it's generally not supposed to flow quite as well, but we'll do our best and see how it looks. We're going to go ahead and work on this PlayStation 1 first, this PlayStation 1 Power Supply. Is to kind of take a look at this, and an easy thing to do, it's not really common at all amongst the PS1 Power Supplies from what I've looked at, but kind of take a look right here at the solder, and just make sure that it's not cracked. Right here where people are plugging and unplugging the power cable. That's an easy thing to replace. While you've already got this part, it would be good to go ahead and just do that. We're looking at the caps. This can be a little bit more, depending on how crowded your board is, it can be a little bit more difficult, but we're just kind of, some of them are actually labeled pretty well, so that actually helps us out. Like this says C202, and I can see the plus. And so that will help me out, but on some of these other power supplies, they actually aren't as good. These have symbols, but not everything is going to be marked on this Sega power supply. I'm going to get my light over here. And actually, this is actually flowing pretty well, you know, for lead-free solder. It's not too bad at all. So I've added solder to this joint. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of different tricks here. I'm not going to actually use that desoldering gun at first. So you can take your finger here. You can actually kind of start working on this. I'm touching one of the legs, and I'm going to kind of rock it out. And so if you do not have a desoldering gun and you're relying on that wick, this is probably the way to do it. Okay, so there's our old capacitor.
Walk right out.
And what I'm going to show you, you're going to go through more of this copper braid doing this. But Oh, did you get yourself on the...
I did just a little bit.
Didn't know it was still there.
Just a short PSA, and this should really go without saying, but soldering irons are really dangerous. They're very, very hot, and you could burn the crap out of yourself if you're not paying attention. And unfortunately, during the filming of this video, that's exactly what happened, because I was so focused on getting the camera shots that I wanted that I wasn't paying attention to what my hand was doing. Now I've got this really disgusting boil on my finger right here because I touched the iron when I was not paying attention. So, like I said, it should go without saying, but just be careful, okay? Because this stuff can be very dangerous.
I turned it off, but it still takes a while for that to cool down. That's actually working okay. You can see it's using capillary action. It's kind of driving itself up the braid. You can see that? Okay. And you can see that one was not leaking. That's good. Don't see any leakage on that one. It's not really common. These are good capacitors. These are Rubicons. They're not really going to be often that they're going to be leaking. This is a PS1 Power Supply too, and they're just not as prone to it. But you can see here if you want to get a shot of that.
Yeah.
We're going to go ahead and clean that area before we put in a new one. But we're going to go ahead and take all of these out real quick. But you're going to need to, if you see that it's leaked, you probably should use a toothbrush to really get in that hole, those holes there, and get out any of that old electrolyte. But that's just a little bit of flux, so that's not an issue here. Let's see, that one's good to go. Without adding solder, I may not actually have any issue, but you can see here this desoldering gun. I'm putting it down. Oops, kind of hard to do. And I'm kind of going around in a circle. You can hear that. You can hear that that pressure. That means that there's no solder. And then this one had a little bit of glue from the factory, and so I may be able to actually get this with some tweezers. Just kind of poke at it a little bit. Normally I'd probably go ahead and use an X-Acto knife on this, but alright. Okay. I'm just going to knock these out. And all of these are looking good so far. I'm not seeing any leaked electrolyte, but it doesn't really matter. These are, at this point, these are pretty old. Nearly 30 years, getting close to 30 years. Sometimes this big one will be the one if you do have a leaker.
Man, I got to tell you that the best thing I've learned so far is that I need one of those guns.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm going to also recap the motherboard too. You might as well recap this power supply. And you can buy, I've seen, and I've even used them briefly, there's newer power supplies out where you just use like a 12-volt power supply, but it's a small little board that you can fit on a PS1 and a Dreamcast, like the RE Saturn and the RE PS1. But really, you don't need those. You can just recap one of these and you're good to go.
So here's the board. Capacitors are all gone, and that looks very clean. And what are some signs that it's not clean? What would we be looking at if one of the capacitors had leaked over
So you're
time?
looking like at a brown liquid. So like this is very, very light. That's flux from the factory. That's not a problem at all. But like you'll know it if you see it. It's a kind of a darker brown color. It smells bad. It smells like it's got like a kind of a fishy smell. The Dreamcast is going to be more prone to it. This one here, but even I haven't seen those across the board. It's just like it's more common to have bad capacitors in these Dreamcast consoles. Sega Genesis or something like that. Those power supplies, I've seen a lot of those that have gone bad at this point. So what I'm doing for cleaning is kind of just a quick brush along all of these little areas that we worked on, and we'll do this again at the end. This is not really strictly necessary at this point because I didn't see anything that was leaking, but it's just a good idea to do it. And you can see this board is pretty well marked, so it should be very easy for us to just go ahead and place new capacitors, and then we'll solder them in all the new ones.
All right, now it's time to install capacitors now.
See here, this is an SR670. You're going to have to open up your console to actually know what the specific revision of the power supply is. Most consoles have multiple power supply revisions, and so you can't just buy a kit, and they usually sell them on Console 5 by the specific power supply. And so I have kind of printed this off from the Tech Wiki. And so we're looking at this SR670 right here. The C104, we know this is the big one, 120 microfarads, 200 volts. And you can see 200 and 150. And I've already gotten rid of the old one, but it's right here. We'll just check that one. So 200 and 150. You can go higher on the voltage, that's fine. Not a great idea to change the actual capacitance, though. You want that to be pretty close to the same. And as you can see, this old power supply is actually bigger than this this newer one. Not by a lot, but that can be just differences in the almost 25, 30 years of capacitor development. Some of these original power supplies, they're going to use 85 degrees Celsius capacitors, and Console 5 usually will always replace them with 105 degrees Celsius capacitors, and this is kind of like the internal temperature that the capacitor can get to whenever it's being in use, which can get pretty high. Even if it doesn't call for 105 degrees Celsius temperature, these will last longer operating at a lower temperature compared to the 85 degrees Celsius one. And there's not really that much of a difference in price usually between the two. And so that's one of the reasons why Console 5, and if you're doing these yourself and building a kit, it's usually not a bad idea to just go ahead and get the 105 degrees Celsius capacitors. And you can see here, most boards are nice, and they will mark the polarity. You see this mark here? That's the negative side, and so most capacitors are going to have this little stripe here, and this is the important part. You do want to actually make sure that that is correct. So you can see the stripe is going on the same side as the mark on the board.
Same side as it was on the board there.
Yeah, and then whenever you're just I like to just kind of go ahead and get all of these capacitors in. You just kind of fold them off to the side so that they don't move on you, or they don't fall out on you. Barely see that little mark there to indicate that on this particular one, the right side is where you want to have the negative side of your capacitor. This is actually considerably larger, I can already tell, than the one that replaced this. It's not a problem as long as it fits. That's just kind of something to note.
All the legs are sticking out.
I could, if I wanted to, kind of hold this with my finger and have the legs straight. It doesn't really matter. I'm still going to be able to clip off this excess. Let's do the big one first. We're going to go ahead and add a little bit of flux, and we can clean all this off at the end. I'm just going to do it real quick for all of them so I don't have to do it later.
Just a little bit of goopy.
Yep. And this is going to be what really makes quite a bit of the smoke whenever we get to working on this. I'm bringing the solder up to the area that I want to solder. But I'm not doing this. You can do this if you're trying to just stick something in place so that you can do a better job elsewhere, but that's not good practice. So what we're going to do is kind of heat the area with the iron, bring that solder up to it,
and then let go.
And if you want to take a look at that, you can see it's nice and shiny, it's not cloudy, it's covering the whole joint. And the flux really helps with this.
See, in the past, I would try to put a blob of solder on the actual point and then bring it to the board. But that's a no-no.
And see this area right here, so we got some ground planes. It might be you can see this width right here where there's copper underneath there. It's not going to be a problem on this power supply, but just know that working on certain things, you may have to have a little bit higher temperature on certain areas of your power supply if there's more copper that's soaking up the heat whenever you're bringing heat to the board. Okay.
So now that they're tacked in place, you can just kind of move the legs and clip them, right?
Yeah, and some boards, and I'm mostly looking at Sega on their motherboards, not so much their power supplies, but like I have actually had some of these like grip pads in certain areas where they're weak if I just use my fingers. So what I like to do is actually just go ahead and use the tweezers, so you're kind of distributing that pressure a little bit more evenly. You just kind of pull them up here so that you don't risk too much that's going to rip the pad, because we can fix that, but we don't want to if we don't have to. There's just plastic on the bottom of this. If it's near metal, that could be a concern, so we would definitely want to make things pretty flush. But this is just touching the plastic. Plastic doesn't conduct, at least this plastic doesn't have anything that would conduct any electricity, so we're good on that.
Don't necessarily have to get those extremely flush there, because they're just going to be touching the plastic and no metal.
And what I like to do, and you don't strictly have to do it, is after I've done all this, I'm gonna touch up these joints again, just in case there's a possibility that I disturbed something by the action of using this flush cutter. And it does actually make it look a little bit nicer too. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and touch this up. And it doesn't actually hurt to just go ahead and do that. It makes it look a little nicer. And then I'm checking the joints as I'm going, like that one. I actually probably wanna go ahead and hit that. Yep, hit that again.
It's almost like you're just like kind of scraping it a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. Kind of hard to explain. I've done this so much, but essentially just you want it to be shiny and everything is being covered. We don't have any holes in our solder where something's not completely covered in that metal. And I'm just going to go through this, kind of scrub.
There's a little bit of that yellowy residue left over there.
Yeah. That way we don't have any issues in the future. I'll just kind of quickly follow up just to see if there's anything there. And then as you're looking, you just want to make sure that by using the brush, you probably, if there were like any little flecks of solder that got knocked loose, that would be around the board, we probably got rid of that whenever we were using the toothbrush. But just to make sure that there's not any issues there, because we don't want little pieces of metal in this whenever we actually turn it on. We don't want anything floating around. And it looks pretty good. And that's just some old factory flux. I'm not worried about that, because that's not where I was working on. And then that's the board, and it is good to go. This particular one is good to go.
You can kind of see the shininess where you were.
And again, this is actually my first time working with lead-free solder, so it actually worked pretty well. So this wasn't too bad. For the Dreamcast, we're actually going to do two things. So we've got the power supply, that'll be pretty easy. But there's also, if you don't want to worry about doing the motherboard, there's also a few things that people like to do. If you have controllers plugged in to the Dreamcast, and the Dreamcast is turned on and you yank that controller out, there's always a chance that you're going to blow this little fuse right here. Then you're going to have to replace it to get this whole port to work again. So what's pretty common nowadays is for people to put this little film capacitor in there, and it's resettable. And you can turn the console off and turn it back on, and then you're good to go. One right here that you would need to worry about at some point, but there's really not any stress on this board, so I've never seen one of these leak, but we're just going to go ahead and replace it anyway. This is also an issue. You cannot get this specific type of rechargeable battery anymore. You might be plugging in your Dreamcast for a couple hours, and at this point I don't even know if they'll hold a charge anymore. I usually don't even check anymore. But we're going to remove this, and this already has a connector that was factory soldered to the battery. And so what we're going to do is we're going to solder this battery holder, and then we can use an ML2032 in place. And it doesn't have the same capacity as this, but it generally will last a pretty good amount of time. Turn on the console, and you're being greeted by having to reset the date and every single time you turn on the console, because that's pretty annoying. Same thing as before, I am going to go ahead and add some fresh solder, and we're going to remove the battery, and we're going to remove this capacitor, and we're going to remove the fuse. And I don't really care about how that looks, so I'm just adding some fresh to it just to make it easier to work on. Okay, so, and I like to kind of just start moving this a little bit. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
So whenever you can move it like that, but you don't want to put much pressure just in case you accidentally did not desolder it all the way.
Move it again.
But
It's wiggly now.
yeah, and then just taking a look at it. And what I also like to do, because really some of this stuff you don't want to chance, so if it's not actually completely desoldered, you can rip this pad and you can fix it, but it's kind of extra work that we don't really want to have to do. But you can twist it with the tweezers. That means it's desoldered, so it's good to take off. Now this part, like I could remove this probably. If you're not really familiar with soldering, go ahead and remove this so you don't burn this cable up and have to go buy another one. Because you can, but probably gonna have to wait a while for it to come in the mail. Okay. And that's good to go. You can see I'm wiggling that and it's all moving freely. And just hopefully we actually get it out. Let's see here. Is it all the way free? I don't believe it is. So. Okay, so I can tell that this one's good to go. This one is not free yet. What you can do is just go ahead and add some more solder. And this, again, is also a soldering gun, so I don't have to break out the other if I don't want to. Add some more solder.
2 in 1.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Alright. Yeah, it's just being difficult. It's broken free.
Well, I'm glad that this happened on camera. Glad to know that it's not just me, because it's been more often than not when I try to do this, it ends up being
Definitely don't
difficult.
force it. If you're desoldering something, do not force whatever it is that's out of it. Make sure that you've got it completely desoldered from the via so that you don't damage it.
Via is
Right
this
here.
little circle
Yeah.
right there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the legs go through. That's what you would call the via.
And this is where it can be a little problematic not having enough hands. So I'm going to actually try and get this to work for me.
Alligator clipped, yay!
Okay. And to me, yeah, I added a little too much solder onto that. It doesn't really matter, but it's not just a ridiculous amount too much, but sometimes you can just go ahead and do this, what I was just doing, and just drag it off. And if you just got a little too much solder, that will take care of it for you. My capacitor, which is marked on the board, the polarity. So we've got a big straight colored line that's white on this side that lets me know that that's where the stripe should go. Okay. And I'm going to definitely take this off and take a closer look here in a second, but I've got them all tacked down.
So, yeah, a common thing to do is just to tack everything in place and then go back and check your work afterwards.
Yes. Okay. And then this one. And then my battery holder. That looks good. I don't have any issues with that. Okay. And this is the battery, ML2032. You can use a Lear 20. I've seen, I wouldn't say you can use a Lear 2032, but it has a higher operating voltage, and the Dreamcast is not going to actually charge that one to the full capacity that it needs to be charged at. So the ML2032 is the one that's recommended to be used if you're going to do one of these little battery replacements. You see plus here. This is plus on the battery, so we're just going to put that in here. And then it can take a couple of hours for your Dreamcast to charge it, and then I find that you need to play the Dreamcast every 1 to 2 weeks for it to keep a full charge. After that, but then you're not having to constantly reset the calendar on the date and time on your Dreamcast whenever you turn it on. This is a Dreamcast Power Supply. I'm just going to recap this as if you were just using the disk drive. We can talk about in more detail later if you're going to do this for a GDEMU. Some people will take out the 12-volt voltage regulator because it's no longer needed if you're using the GDEMU, and the power supply will get a little bit hot. Newer advice, there's a capacitor here, a little surface mount one. Or I'm sorry, I think it's actually a resistor, and you can just take that out of the circuit and it will kind of do the same thing. And so this power supply itself won't get so hot if you're not using the disk drive anymore. Solder on these Dreamcast power supplies is not kind of like old enough to where I feel like you necessarily have to add more solder whenever you're desoldering. It's always a good idea too, but just in the sake of expediency here, I'm not going to do it. Right here. It's coming right off. No issues with these so far. And this is right by voltage regulators. They get hot whenever they're transferring voltage to 5 volts, 12 volts. So these could be the ones that would be bad. And we've got some other ones here. These, they create a lot of heat. So anything that's near these transistors, those are probably going to be the ones that leak if you have issues in a power supply. That could be excess flux. That's a suspect one. Yeah. I'm not smelling that smell that you usually get from the leaked electrolyte. And that one's definitely fine, but those are suspect.
That smell.
And this one is going to be a little bit hard because there's so much that's in this area. I see a plus, so that helps. So I know that probably that one is, yep. So it's probably this one right by it. Yep, no issues with that one. I've actually opened up one of these Dreamcast power supplies and it's liquid still. So like at that point that if it's a little, see what kind of makes me a little doubt this is that while that would be a lot of factory flux, it's not that darker brown color that I usually see. I've seen that before, you smell it, and that's like an actively leaking electrolytic capacitor. If you're starting out and you want to practice and it's not on power supplies, I found a Super Nintendo, the junior model, is a good beginner. The early Super Nintendos, especially if it's one of the really early revisions, they will have some surface mount capacitors, and actually they're starting to leak. I've seen that in a few of these. So I probably wouldn't recommend that if you're just starting out. But looking at one that I've actually worked on before, most of what you're looking at is here in the back, and you've got a lot of room to work with. You don't even need to touch that voltage regulator.
And they're all lined up.
They're all lined up
in a row.
Yeah,
really
they're not hard at all. And in fact, that one's not even there. That's like a noise fix. So that's actually it. That's an aftermarket thing that I've done, attaching that to this improved voltage regulator. But you're mostly just looking at this stuff right here. Very easy to do. Doesn't take very long at all to knock out one of those. I don't even know if that's maybe the one I did for you. So
it very well could be. It very well could be. Thank you so much for doing this, man. It's really interesting to see how you've been doing it this whole time, because you've done pretty much everything for me in the past, and I'm very curious about that desoldering gun now.
Actually, hey, if you want to turn that back on, I don't know if it already is. Okay.
On.
So a little bit of maintenance for one of these, if anybody wants to pick one up. I'm letting it warm up right now, and it is adjustable. This is not exact on the temperature, but I've got it roughly 400 degrees Celsius, I could actually tone that down a little bit. But you don't want to hold this over whatever you're working on very long, because again, same thing with a soldering iron, it could melt some pads. But so it's warmed up, it should be fine now. So that is going to suck whatever it's touching into this chamber. You will want to periodically actually clean this out. And so occasionally this will get in. Try to do this on camera. Just kind of get whatever's in there out. There's also, I'm going to turn this off. There's this filter. It's good for a while. You can hear it. It won't suck as well. It'll kind of sound like it's stuck. So this filter will start getting clogged, and it's mostly going to get clogged with your flux. And so I can actually show that's some of the solder that we worked on. And then at this point, it's not all yellow and brown and stuff like that from the flux, but it will get that way. And once it kind of gets too saturated, then I just go ahead and change them out. But these are pretty good if you're willing to spend the money on it. But if you're doing quite a bit, like if you're doing a couple consoles, like it just saves a significant amount of time having one of these.
Definitely. I mean, how long did that take? You changed out like how many different, 3 different things with capacitors? That took us what, like an hour maybe?
Yeah, and yeah, what I would have done if I didn't have this, I would have, added some fresh solder, kind of done a little kind of tilting it out, and then using braid to clean up. But that takes a lot longer than using this. If you're gonna work on something that has actually leaked, like a Sega CD that I've worked on quite a bit, probably want to go ahead and clean this a little bit more often, so you're not like really contaminating the next console you work on, adding all of that leaked electrolyte back into something that didn't have it before.
I don't know about you guys, but I am definitely heavily inspired after getting up close and personal and seeing how he does this stuff. Before it was a really daunting task that was very nerve-wracking and very serious. One simple mistake and you could potentially destroy parts of a console that you can't go to the store and buy anymore. I'm sure you guys can tell from this video that Cody is obviously a very intelligent person. He's very passionate about doing this stuff, and I think that's kind of what it takes. You have to do your homework. You have to kind of know what you're doing. You got to check your work, and you have to be very patient. You saw earlier in the video where things weren't going quite the way that they were supposed to for a specific capacitor, and he just took his time. He didn't panic, and he didn't try to force anything. And that's, I think, the big mistake that a lot of people make, is that they just get too impatient with it. I'm guilty of that myself. I've used Cody for countless jobs where I tried it myself and asked him to kind of come back and save me. Namely the Neo Geo CD. I've got a video all about that. I had it in my head that I could successfully install the Neo SD loader modification in my Neo Geo CD, and I botched it hardcore, man. A good tip for you in particular, if you're just getting into this stuff, start with something small, like what we did today. The power supplies on both the PlayStation 1 as well as the Sega Dreamcast is a great place to start. And even something like the Super Nintendo Junior, where all the capacitors are laid out all in a row just like he showed in the video, that would be such a great place to start. And the most common question that I get on my YouTube channel regarding all this retro video game stuff is, why are you so into the original hardware when you can just emulate all this stuff on your computer? And honestly, I think this video goes a long way in showing why. It's because they're still there, and we can still enjoy them while they're here. We're not, 70, 80, 90 years old just yet. We're still kind of young in our 30s and 40s and maybe even 50s, depending on who you are watching this video, of course. If we can still keep them around and still use them just like we could back in the day, then why not? Nostalgia is a very difficult thing to describe sometimes. We don't know why we like the things we do, we just do. But I think it's so wonderful that to truly work on preserving your video game consoles, eventually you're going to have some maintenance done, whether that's done with a professional, you want to pay to ship your console off somewhere and then pay to ship it back, as well as the mod service, or learn a valuable skill like soldering. I think it's really amazing to do this kind of stuff, and actually good capacitors are not expensive at all. They're actually very, very cheap. One thing that I learned in particular from this video is just the difference in quality of the equipment that Cody used versus something that I would use. I got a soldering iron on Amazon. It was very, very cheap. And I think that honestly kind of goes into me screwing things up. I know it's mostly my fault for being impatient and not knowing what I was doing, not having enough practice. But I can definitely see how having better equipment, higher quality equipment, can make this an easier thing for you to get into and an easier thing for you to learn. So I'm definitely inspired by his work and the fact that he just made it look so damn easy, So I think, because I still have a bunch of consoles back there that will likely need maintenance in the future, I think I might go ahead and invest in some of the equipment that he's got, because video game console preservation is a hugely important thing to me, and that's why I have so many, and that's why I have this YouTube channel. But I hope you guys learned something cool. Let me know what you think about this video in the comment section below. below, and let me know if you've ever tried soldering before, and if this video inspired you to get started. I really appreciate you guys watching this video, and huge thank you to Cody for taking the time out of his weekend to come out here to do this video just for you guys. He's such an amazing guy, the nicest dude you'll ever meet, and I'm seriously thankful for all the work that he's done for me, because otherwise a lot of my YouTube videos wouldn't even be a thing. Thank you so much for subscribing, and I'll catch you guys at the next video. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.